One man is largely responsible for the popularity of toy trains in the 20th century. That man was Joshua Lionel Cowan, a man who started with an idea for a simple flashlight, and what he ended up with has delighted train lovers of all ages for over a century.
Joshua Lionel Cowan, born in 1877, grew up in Manhattan, the eighth of 9 children. An intelligent, curious, and extroverted boy, he often took apart his sister's dolls in order to see how they worked. As an adult, Cohen took a job at the Acme Electric Lamp Company. At this small electrical shop, he would develop the skills that would eventually enable him to launch his own business. On September 5, 1900, Cohen and a colleague from Acme, Harry C. Grant, filed to conduct business in New York. The firm would engage in the manufacturing of electrical novelties and would be known as the Lionel Manufacturing Company.
He came up with the idea of taking his small motor and using it to power a crude-looking railroad car on a small loop of track. And he took that motor and he attached it to the underside of what was really a little box on wheels, devised a loop of track that was 2 7/8 inches between the rails. This was not a gauge that was being used elsewhere in the United States or in Europe.
Cohen sold his first railroad car not as a toy, but to a shopkeeper to attract attention to his store windows. It sold for $4, nearly half a week's wages for most people in 1900. Pretty soon the shopkeeper came back for another. Turned out he didn't use it in his window, he had sold it as a toy for the general public.
Lionel now had its own product and was determined to establish its own niche in a rapidly expanding toy train industry. By the end of 1902, sales had reached $22,000. By the end of the 1900s, they had nearly tripled. Cohen wanted to surpass Ives Manufacturing, which was the leading producer of toy trains in the United States. To do that, he had to come up with a more extensive line of trains. He began doing this in 1906 when he introduced a line of stamped metal trains that was built to a gauge of 2 1/8 inches between the rails. No one else in the world was doing this, not in the United States, not in Europe, and yet he called it standard gauge, a very bold assertion, yet very quickly this did become the standard among electric train producers.
A marketing genius, Cohen came up with a line of accessories and sold each for $1.50. At $6 per set, plus $1.20 for batteries, this toy represented a huge piece of the household budget in 1902.
Cohen quickly learned 2 very valuable lessons from his domestic and foreign competitors. The first was to establish a complete line of trains. He learned this from Marklin and other German competitors. And that line would include trains, rolling stock, and accessories. And this would give children the opportunity over time to acquire more and build their own little empire, their own little network of trains at home. The other thing he learned, which was important, was from Ives Manufacturing, and that is the importance of having an annual catalog, a wish book, in which children could look and see what was available and dream all year of what they would ask for their birthday or for the holidays. In doing this, they would see what they wanted for their empire and then have the toys there that they could indeed get. And the idea was that this could hook them into the hobby for 3-4 years of their lives.
From 1910 to 1920, Lionel's sales grew 15 times. At the time, Lionel employed 700 workers. Sales kept increasing, and the company was a year-round success, not just a Christmas-only toy for boys. In 1931, Lionel had its first losing year. The Depression had hit, and no one had extra money for luxuries like toy trains.
In 1935, working with Walt Disney, Lionel introduced a hand car with Mickey Mouse at one end and Minnie Mouse at the controls at the other. These sold for $1 a piece. They were also popular, and Cowan thought the idea that a mouse had saved the lion was a brilliant one, and so even though it wasn't true, he promoted it actively in the newspapers.
Until 1937, all locomotives and cars had been tin and painted for detail. But in 1937, a breakthrough, the Hudson. For the first time, Lionel was able to economically mass-produce a completely die-cast locomotive with scale model accuracy. This brand-new, state-of-the-art set sold for $75, which would equal about $1,200 in today's prices. In 1937, the Lionel Train Corporation went public, issuing 77,500 shares and raising almost $1 million.
In the late 30s, Lionel began to move away from the color and the whimsy that had distinguished its earlier trains and come up with more realistic and detailed models. Standard gauge was abandoned, and there was no question about the direction that Lionel was moving with very realistic models of top-of-the-line locomotives and rolling stock seen around the country. No question about the direction that they were moving by the time World War II erupted in the United States in 1941 and the following spring in 1942 when federal restrictions prohibited the production of electric trains.
In June 1942, production was stopped by World War II. Lionel helped the Navy with navigational products. When the war ended, Lionel Trains had a decade of unprecedented success. Baby boomer children all wanted a toy train for Christmas, and Lionel's creative wheels were really turning.
Lionel's engineering department was coming up with more and more innovations, from the whistle and the remote control for accessories and operating cars that they developed in the late 1930s. And after the war, you've got smoke, you've got radio wave transmitters on trains, and you've got realistic knuckle couplers. Every year the trains are looking better, the line is growing larger. It's a very exciting time for Lionel.
After the war, the company continued churning out trains and accessories that were must-haves for kids and adults.
After the war, realism is still paramount at Lionel, but it's tempered by a sense of fancifulness, a sense of whimsy. The great example of this is the operating milk car, which children flock to by the thousands, and they want that. Also, there are bright and new colorful paint schemes on the new diesels, the F3 diesel that they introduced. So this is another great moment in the country, in Lionel's history. What makes this happen will be innovations in paint masking, in injection molding of plastics, in powder metallurgy. Just so Lionel is taking advantage of the latest innovations in technology and developing them and adapting them to their electric trains.
1953 was a peak year in sales, but in 1958, Lionel had its first losing year since the Depression. Interest faded and Lionel turned to airplanes, race cars, fishing rods and reels, trying to diversify. In 1957, Lionel created the Lady Lionel train in, quote, fashion colors of pink and lilac. Although highly collectible now, it was a huge flop. In 1959, with the business in decline, Joshua Cohen sold his company to his great-nephew, Roy Cohen. For the next 4 decades, the Lionel name bounced from owner to owner and managed to survive. Through the years, new models and fresh interest have turned the company around. As we head into a new century, Lionel Trains are going strong. Joshua Cohen died at the age of 88 in Palm Beach, Florida. He would no doubt be thrilled to see his trains are still beloved around the world. He was an American success story, an innovator who created a display item and turned it into one of the most recognizable toys of the 20th century. But the man and the company did more. They created something that made a boy feel like a man and a man feel like a boy again.